This is the Good Government Podcast with Aaron Slutkin and Michael Hoffpauir.
I think the Federalist Papers are incredible, so much so that you might say you dream about them or something like this, Aaron.
Yeah, for a weekend of seminars, I am responsible for reading about 20 essays, and last night dreamt that I was just cleaning through them and was amazed at how quickly by now, when you and I have been working so hard through them, I can knock one out, the second one out. And it took me a few moments to realize that actually I have not begun preparing.
Wait a minute. So were you dreaming about the Federalist Papers or dreaming about grading?
No, I was dreaming about the Federalist Papers. I think actually I was dreaming that I had developed a superhuman ability to read the essays of Publius, but I was dreaming about the Federalist.
How funny. That happened the last time I remember dreaming vividly, like nightmarishly about books was one summer when I read a bunch of Dostoevsky. I've probably told you this before. And it was a Dostoevsky summer for me. I did an independent study with Ellis Sandos. It was fantastic. And I started having nightmares about the large staircase, in Crime and Punishment. Sandos looks at me and goes, yeah, it might be about time for you to stop reading the stuff and read something else. I think he was right. Funny.
Well, Dostoevsky's books have such vivid dreams in them themselves.
Yeah. So I think, therefore, we should follow something of Sandos's advice, even though you're not dreaming about a nightmarish staircase that has something to do with your guilt over the crime you've committed. Let's shift a little bit and take a moment's pause from thinking about the Federalists' arguments and look at a wonderful, tiny argument from Abraham Lincoln. This is something from Abraham Lincoln called Fragment on Slavery. I don't know much history about these fragments, except they're on the cutting room floor. Some of these fragments will go, oh, we believe this is from the first inaugural or something like this. And the fragment on slavery that Aaron and I are going to discuss is from, it seems, 1854. And it seems to be from just before Lincoln's speech on the Kansas-Nebraska Act at Peoria, Illinois, from 1854. I think, Aaron, you told me it's your favorite speech, one of your favorite pre-presidency speeches from Lincoln.
Yeah, that's right. It's the only of Lincoln's speeches before the presidency that my students and I take about a full class period and discuss. Just working through his objection to slavery, working through what I think he is thinking about in this very brief fragment on slavery, which is the doctrine of popular sovereignty. Doctrine that there can be moral or even political right in one man's enslaving another.
I agree with you. The speech on the Kansas-Nebraska Act, I think, is incredible. And for me, the other one, which I love spending so much time on with students, is the speech on the Dred Scott decision. I think the two are a wonderful pair that teach us so much about how to think about the principles that undergird our hatred of the evil that is slavery. What is in our hearts is backed up by what is in our minds, thanks to our teacher, Lincoln, who helps us understand the principles that are entwined about our heart. And so that's why you and I want to pay some attention to this little fragment on slavery. It's only 4 paragraphs, but man, it contains so much more than that. So let's take a look at this fragment on slavery. Why don't you start us off, if you don't mind?
I'm wondering if we should read it.
Yeah, here, I'm going to time you. I'd be very curious, because we pay attention. We go, first inaugural took approximately 35 minutes.
This, I wonder, just looking at the body of text, if it's about the exact same length as the Gettysburg Address. And it goes exactly like this. If A can prove, however conclusively, that he may of right enslave B, why may not B snatch the same argument and prove equally that he may enslave A? You say A is white and B is black. Is it color then? The lighter having the right to enslave the darker? Take care. By this rule, you are to be slave to the first man you meet with a fairer skin than your own. You do not mean color exactly. You mean the whites are intellectually the superiors of the blacks, and therefore have the right to enslave them? Take care again. By this rule, you are to be slave to the first man you meet with an intellect superior to your own. But say you, it is a question of interest. And if you can make it your interest, you have the right to enslave another. Very well. And if he can make it his interest, he has the right to enslave you. That's it. As he says in the Lincoln movie, that's my speech.
That's 4 little paragraphs. That's it. The Lincoln movie, the other thing you've been watching a lot lately. Yeah, the 4 paragraphs, 4 little paragraphs, starting from this wonderful opening statement. This is the premise that shall be tested in the opening statement. If you can prove, however conclusively, that you may by right enslave another, why cannot that other snatch the argument from you? Okay, let's now test that. That's the question. You're going to say that you're stronger than I am, and therefore you can enslave me. Well, can somebody else snatch that argument from you? So this is the way I read it. I wonder if that's how you read it. I mean, I'm reading it as we have the opening statement here in the first paragraph, and then it's tested in the following second, third, and fourth paragraphs, according to color, intellect, and interest, respectively. Is that how you read this, Aaron?
So to clarify, I think what I understand you're saying, that Lincoln is saying justice may be the advantage of the stronger, but you have to be really, really careful to make sure you're the toughest guy on the block if you're going to make that argument.
Yeah, I'm not sure if he would say may. I mean, I'm always really hesitant to say that lest either of us be misunderstood. But how about he's saying, you're saying that?
You're saying that, right. And that's what he says, you say.
You say. You're the one who's making that argument, because we know, especially from our understanding of the speech on the Kansas-Nebraska Act and speech on the Dred Scott decision, I'm just saying those two because those are the two we've already mentioned here, that there's a principle that doesn't have this definition of justice and refuses to admit it. That principle being, of course, our equality. But let's take a look before I digress. That's too far away. So this is a matter of right. And then let's see. Okay, by right, you can enslave me, it seems. You say, Mr. A, because you're white and because me, Mr. B, is black. Color is the standard. Well, don't we understand that there are gradients here? And if we just look at color, the next person you come across who has fair skin, by right, may enslave you. I think maybe this is what, Aaron, is this what you were getting at with justice being nothing other than might makes right here, or the advantage of the stronger? Because all it is an argument for whoever's on top of this lame hierarchy at any given moment.
So if it's not color, he moves on, well, must be intellectual superiority. But if you say that you have the right to enslave another man by virtue of your intellectual superiority, someone will tap you on the shoulder and compare IQ tests with you, and all of a sudden, he now can rightly enslave you. Take care again, he cautions.
That's why I love this line. We should emphasize this. He says it, of course, in the color section, and then now he says it again in the intellect section. Take care. What a funny admonition. That it's a warning / admonition. Yeah, watch out with that argument if you were to be sarcastic today.
It shows how potentially ruinous this line of thinking is. Right? It's not simply that slaveholders or those who are defending slavery either because it is a positive institution or because of the right of popular sovereignty are doing something unjust, but they are creating an argument that is essentially digging their own grave.
And this argument is not isolated to this circumstance and the attempted justification of race-based slavery, chattel slavery. We find Aristotle making very similar arguments in the Politics. This is about the principle of who rules. What's the basis? Well, we have more money. This is an oligarchy and we have the money. Well, take care, Lincoln would say, lest someone comes along with another dollar than you have, with one more. To say nothing of the fact that what's really fun about thinking about it in terms of fortune, financial fortune, is fortunes rise and fall. So it's a principle of government that only admits of change, which seems antithetical to anything like government would want to establish as its justification. And you could do the same thing over and over again. Is it honor? Is it strength? Is it virtue? All of these principles point to the rule of one. And then whoever it is that these attempted principles, I should say, point to the rule of one, and whoever is the one, it depends on the day.
Yeah, and I think this is winding toward a preferred kind of government for Lincoln, right? One that will keep people safe depending on where they fall on the color gradient, on the intelligence gradient, where Lincoln might say it is better to be ruled by one who is intelligent than one who is unintelligent. But that doesn't mean that the unintelligent should not have which the intelligent are bound to respect.
Yeah, I completely agree. Or by right should be enslaved to you. So let's turn to interest. This is the final paragraph of this lovely little fragment. I'm just going to reread it so we can get our bearings again. But, say you, it is a question of interest, and if you can make it your interest, you have the right to enslave another very well. And if he can make it his interest, he has the right to enslave you. How do you read this? Is Lincoln pointing his finger at you and wagging it when he says this? Of course it's in my interest to enslave you. Yeah, my name's Theages. I want to be a tyrant. I want to rule over all men. I mean, this is a little book by Plato, a little dialogue by Plato called the Theages. Yeah, of course. But don't you realize the problem of your argument? So too does everyone. And now what is your life? What is the world? Your principle is nothing other than violence.
Yeah. And in past, when we've been discussing the Federalist, we acknowledge so quickly the need for government to protect us from our fellow citizens, to protect us from our possible political enemies. But part of the lesson on moderation that we've been getting through the first 14 essays is about moderating ourselves, right? The necessity of restraining ourselves in order to live in civil society, right? So, of course, I don't want to be enslaved by my neighbor, and of course, it's in my interest to enslave you. I don't think Lincoln rejects that, right? It's someone more like Jefferson who is going to say that slavery debauches your own morals, or Tocqueville. We get a little bit of that in the Peoria address, but right here, we're not talking about your soul. We're not talking about your manners. We're talking about interest. Of course, like you say, it's in my interest to enslave you. But interest is not the most important thing in politics.
Yeah, and you think it's in your interest to enslave me. I could argue why it's not in your interest to enslave me, and I would make an argument about how it's going to deflate your soul, flatten your soul, if not completely corrupt it. But as you're rightly pointing out here, Aaron, this is Lincoln. This is a man whose temperance address really reveals how much he understands about rhetoric, whose Lyceum address reveals how much he understands about rhetoric, about how to talk to an audience. And since this is a fragment, that means it was something he didn't see as suiting his immediate purposes. Yeah. But as a statesman, I'm not going to say just as a lawyer, as a statesman, Lincoln understands that he needs to meet his audience where it is and try and move them. And so instead of just coming at them and moralizing and finger wagging like anyone would from the temperance address, and that's why I'm bringing that up right now. Go back there and look at the musings on rhetoric that are contained within his address to the Temperance Society. Instead of coming out and finger wagging about their moral corruption at this point, he's trying to say, look, this principle doesn't work. On your own terms, it doesn't work. And you've said this in the past, Aaron. I wonder if you have any thoughts on it now. What reflections does this offer us for our future study, if we were to take one up, of the Cornerstone?
The Cornerstone address, which Vice President of the Confederacy Alexander Stephens gives shortly after the founding of the Confederate States of America, he declares famously, the cornerstone of our republic is the inferiority of the black man to the white man. He calls racial inequality this great self-evident truth. And so the Declaration of Independence is a self-evident lie or untruth. And his argument is so clearly founded on contemporary scientific literature about, I think, what the term now is scientific racism, that in the run-up to the 1860s, a positive justification for slavery began to emerge, took part of its basis on racial inequality. That is a speech very much asking its listeners, you get in trouble here, trust the science, to listen to a kind of reason which misreads facts about human nature, but doesn't have at its foundation a fundamental idea of human equality that, say, the Declaration in the American founding introduces. And what I guess I want to hear your thoughts about this, because Lincoln doesn't seem to build into this argument in the Fragment on slavery an idea of human equality. That is not the purpose here, right? As you said, the purpose is to try to prove proponents of slavery wrong on their own terms. To say to Stevens, right, Stevens, if you can find someone more intelligent than you, wider than you, more interested than you, then you have to, the cornerstone of your speech is something different.
Yeah, Stevens, I would point out, also cites biblical sanction. So there's a interpretation of the Bible as well. He advances this, or at least finds biblical sanction in it as well, for the white race, and thinks of this as an entirety of the race being elected. But so it's interesting to see that, look, the timing doesn't work out because that speech comes later, the Cornerstone address. But nonetheless, Lincoln's point here, I can only infer, I don't know it because, again, it's only 4 paragraphs out of the blue. I can only infer that he's trying to talk on the level of principle to whomever A is here, the proponents of the superiority of one man or one race over another. But I still think that you could say that the same thing applies. I'm kind of skirting your question for the time being, Aaron. We can say, okay, well, if it's a matter of color, well, then all you have to do is find a fairer race. And you go, all of a sudden, some level of Slav or something, I don't know, comes out and is a fairer race. And myself with my Italian heritage, done. And then all of a sudden, that's the way that's going to play out. And then intellect, you could start doing these distinctions as well. And then finally, interest, of course, which is all it's about at the end of the day. I would suggest that's a consistent theme. If we can link together the 3 things that we've been discussing most overtly: Fragment on slavery, speech on Kansas-Nebraska Act, speech on Dred Scott decision. It's about mammon. It's about money.
Yeah.
And then it's about nothing other than whether you have the strength to maintain your interest over another. And that principle is might makes right. Now, to return to what you asked or were thinking about moments ago, over against this is the principle that all human beings are by nature equal in certain natural rights. And my favorite articulation of that in Lincoln is in speech on Dred Scott decision regarding the equality of Abraham Lincoln himself with a black woman. And he says, we are equal when it comes to enjoying the fruits of our labor. Yeah. And then he goes on after that to say, look, there are plenty of ways in which we aren't equal. Lincoln's taller. Lincoln might be wittier. He might be smarter than she is. And of course, they're not equal in these ways. But when it comes down to self-government, to the right to have property in your labor, which means in yourself, to be a free human being, yeah, we're all equal, he says there. This is what the Declaration of Independence offers us. This is what the authors of that sacred document meant. This is what they meant for us to labor for, he argues there. And so we don't have that principle announced fully here, the saving principle, that sacred principle of the Declaration of Independence, but it is where we go. Because here's what I want to point out about this. When we look at paragraphs 2, 3, and 4 in the Fragment of Slavery, where is the floor beneath our feet? Where is the solid ground upon which we stand? I would suggest that it is not solid. It is ever shifting. According to, at the end of the day, whoever has the strength to enforce their interest by dominating and enslaving others. The Declaration offers solid ground. As Coolidge says in his address at the 150th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, there's a finality in the Declaration. He says, there's a finality that is exceedingly restful. And he goes on, if all men are created equal, that's final. If all men are endowed with inalienable rights, that's final. If governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed, that's final. There's a principle. I can't help it. I'm thinking of speech on Dred Scott decision. The Declaration and its principle of the fundamental equality of human beings is a skeleton key capable of unlocking all of the doors of the prison house that is slavery. There's a principle. But even to start to get open to that principle, I wonder now if I can concentrate on the rhetoric of this little fragment on slavery. I wonder if I am A, the person he calls A in this fragment, who thinks that by right I may enslave another for their difference in color, intellect, or my own interest. I wonder if rhetorically and as a matter of education, I need to start to question the principles that underpin my own justification of my life and my actions before I can move into the principle of Lincoln and the Declaration of Independence. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think part of the reason why it's so important, and sometimes I hear people saying that students shouldn't study the pro-slavery arguments or the arguments of Confederates because, God forbid, what if they find them agreeable? I think part of the reason why it's so important to study these arguments is the only thing that can really turn someone against these arguments for slavery is not something like the fragment on slavery, but actually the shaping of a moral conviction that slavery is wrong. And that can only come from the Declaration or some other fundamental recognition of a kind of human equality. And I was thinking just a moment ago when you were bringing up the speech on the Dred Scott decision, and Lincoln invokes this line from Genesis about wringing your bread from the sweat of your brow or the sweat of your hands. Isn't it? I mean, it's reductive, but I want to hear what you have to think. Isn't it also an appeal to self-interest to say that one should not enslave another because one doesn't have a right to the bread they earn from the sweat of their own brow?
That could easily be one day you're going to be old and therefore you're going to be weak, or one day you're not going to have the numbers and you're going to be weak. Yeah, the shoes could be on the other foot. Don't you want some more moderate path? Yeah, sure, one could make that argument. But typically those people who feel as if they have right on their side, because notice in the opening clause or the opening paragraph of Fragment on Slavery, if A can prove, however conclusively, that he may of right. So we have to realize that there's a certain attachment to right here. So there's some vehemence, attachment, some passion. It's not just oh, well, heck, I didn't think that I might be on the losing side one day. And Lincoln's trying to open them up to that, I think. Yeah, but by all means, look, it's one thing for me to be a proponent of declaration thinking because of my self-interest, not to be ruled by any other, to be sure, but it could also be in my self-interest to try and secure what's good. We might start making some highfalutin arguments that what's natural to human beings is also good. I mean, for crying out loud, Aaron, is injustice bad? I hope you say yes. Is going against human beings' natural rights unjust? And maybe you'll say yes, or maybe you'll say according to Lincoln, yes, or according to the Declaration, yes. And then I would start making the argument that way and saying, staying clear as much as possible of what's bad, unjust, and even evil is in your self-interest. Going the whole other direction into what's good, just, yeah, that's in your self-interest. Yeah, it's important for us to remind ourselves that justice need not be a self-sacrifice. You are going to have to, we are here to remember their sacrifices sort of thinking. And we should admit that what it takes to bring about the principles of the Declaration of Independence, no matter if it's in 1776 or 1861 through 5, and to say nothing of what follows, is violence, is strength to secure those principles. But the basis of those principles, their legitimacy, does not rest on violence alone. It rests on our hearts and minds assenting to them and embracing them. Lincoln's here to offer us that. Golly, now I'm just talking about Lincoln and not even talking about the fragment. I apologize.
Well, so do I hear you saying that an understanding of how people might turn away from a pro-slavery position happens when first they realize that there's something about the way that we form our attachments, that first we realize that slavery is not actually in our interest, or that we misunderstand our own interest, and then a moral argument can accompany it. And I'm thinking now in the Peoria address, when Lincoln says that he does not blame Southern men for slavery, he imagines some Northern men go down south and become tip-top abolitionists. And maybe, as is the historical account for how the pro-slavery ideology emerged, the people found their way to a pro-slavery moral position first of interest. They were courted by Mammon, and then they created justifications to follow it. If that's the case, it sounds like what we were talking with in Fed 10 about the relationship between our reason and our self-love.
Yeah, that's right. I think you're right. Why don't we also do this here? I hope I'm not making it convoluted now, but look at the way that Thomas Jefferson in Query 18, Notes of the State of Virginia on Manners, he makes the argument totally in terms of interest. And he's going to say, look, your children, my words now, are going to be raised in this schoolhouse of despotism and are going to become despots and aren't going to distinguish between free man and enslaved man and are going to enslave everyone. So he's right there saying, you love free government. You also love slavery, as paradoxical as that is. Don't you realize that you're not going to be able to have free government if you have unfree human beings in your midst? These conditions undermine one of your loves. You can't have both ways. So that's an argument for interest, I think. And it is a moral argument because it's Thomas Jefferson, we understand. And that query ends with this. What is the line? I tremble before the thoughts of a punishing God.
I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just.
Yeah, God is just. Yeah, there it is. Thank you. So I think that we can see these arguments rhetorically have a lot of purchase with people, and it's never the last word. But yeah, sure, interest is always at play. And Lincoln, as much as anybody who's worth their statesmanly salt, is going to recognize that you can't do away with these interests. You can channel them, refine them, hopefully turn them towards something like the common good, which in this case, the common good would be the securing of our fundamental natural rights. And this was the argument I've made before in thinking about Fed 14. Fed 14 shows and reminds us of those aspects of Fed 10, which you just referenced, namely that human beings have opinions and interests and self-love, and that their opinions are going to have a reciprocal effect on their self-love, and then we become entrenched and cemented in them. Publius has been trying to channel those towards union and the Constitution. Why can't Lincoln do the same thing?
Well, and if we can think about the Civil War and about the Gettysburg Address and the Bixby Letter and the Second Inaugural and his own death as well, how rigorous the education and the evil of slavery has to be. Right? It has to be this divine moral message accompanied by the strength of arms. And it's not simply enough for him to be able to prove that it isn't in one's interest. It has to be so much grander than that and so much more, let's say, fundamental and astounding.
Yeah, this is right. Hey, with what you've got me thinking about with interest, let me do this with the closing clause. Let's see if it works. I'm doing it live. This is the final paragraph of the fragment on slavery. But say you, it is a question of interest. And if you can make it your interest, you have the right to be equal with another. So I'm adding an equal instead of slavery because I'm thinking now declaration. Very well, says Lincoln. And if he can make it his interest, he has the right to be equal with you. So does that funny thinking that I'm trying to engage in here of pulling out the so-called justifications for slavery here and replacing them with declaration thinking, does it function the same?
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking about a teacher that you've had and that I've had who has argued that liberalism is a truce, that we realize it is in our interests to assert a kind of equality or to erect a structure of legal or possibly a noble lie of natural rights so that we don't end up killing each other over our religion, over our differing and antagonistic classes or something like that. I think it is a different idea if men are naturally equal than if we can agree that we should pretend to be equal for interest's sake. Part of maybe this is because I do believe that slavery is evil, but I wonder if in the framing you've just given me, if I am not convinced as much as I am willing to seem to be convinced.
So I don't know. I'm not going to subscribe to that, let alone publicly subscribe to that. I'm not going to in my heart. It is not a self-evident half lie as far as I'm concerned, or half truth, or whatever way you want me to say it. No, it's the basis of our fundamental equality within this regime and liberal order, and it's a product of considerable intelligence and also effort. And so I think one of the reasons why we should take these little fragments, to say nothing of the whole of Abraham Lincoln's thoughts, seriously, and try our best to make sure people continue to study them, is all of a sudden people will forget these arguments. You know, you bump into people or you read them online who all of a sudden are acting like there aren't profound justifications for our democratic republic, and are arguing things about monarchs and CEOs and all this stuff. You go, wait a minute, you think this just fell, like we fell into this? This isn't the product of reflection and choice? And the same thing has to be said about the arguments against slavery. You think this just happens to be a product of chance? Now, sure, we understand that battles have a lot of variables within them, but these battles also have an organizing principle. Abolition, the arguments for union and the war for union, the war against slavery, have reasoning behind them. That's what we're starting to understand now. So get your cornerstone address out of here, your bunk science and bunk theology out of here, for the next person shall come along and say, divine sanction and my science proves that we Hoffpauirs from South Louisiana, get out of here. This is, it's no, and then all of that's just lip service for, okay, let's fight.
Yeah.
That's what it comes down to. It's mere veneer for violence. Well, Fragment on slavery. Next thing to do then is not only continue to read Lincoln, but to read Aristotle's Politics. I really like book 3 a lot, but we'll just keep on trucking and having conversations, Aaron. I'm going to go sit on my back patio and drink an iced coffee.
I do have a nice cup of tea. It's not an iced coffee. It is hot. I've got it in my Hudson Institute Political Studies Yeti, and thinking one day about the branded merch we'll have when we are ruling the world like benevolent podcasters.
Yes, freely elected.
Yes.
Hey, well, it was great seeing you, Aaron. I can't wait to speak with you again soon. I hope you have a nice evening.
Thanks, you too.
This has been the Good Government Podcast with Aaron Slutkin and Michael Hoffpauir.